How much would you pay for an ant? Sounds bizarre, right? Most of us have spent good money trying to get rid of ants. Yet, right now, someone online is paying over 200 euros for a single ant. Not just any ant, but the queen of the giant African harvester ant. She grows to about the size of your fingernail, sports a red head, rules colonies of thousands, and is being smuggled out of East Africa in test tubes and syringes. But why smuggle African ants in the first place? That's what's coming up. Welcome to Africa Link, the podcast connecting you to the stories that matter. I'm Lucy Riley, your host for today. Here's an interesting story for you. A Chinese national is currently sitting in a Kenyan jail, along with a group of convicted smugglers now known as the Ant Gang. Kenyan courts have ordered them to pay thousands of euros in fines for profiting from the illegal export of tiny, precious cargo, live queen ants bound for exotic pet collectors in Europe and Asia. But this isn't just a story about a strange black market. It's about ecosystems. These ants, scientifically known as mesocephalotes, native to the drylands of Kenya, Ethiopia, and Tanzania, are what scientists call the gardeners of the savannah. They collect and disperse seeds, aerate the soil, and regenerate vegetation in some of the harshest landscapes on Earth. Every colony has just one queen. Remove her, and the colony collapses. Take enough queens, and the savannah itself starts to unravel. Joining me is Dr. Dino Martins, an international ant expert and one of the leading voices on East African insect ecology, and DW's Andrew Osike in Nairobi. Welcome to you both.
Thank you so much. Great to join you.
Thank you for having me.
Andrew, let's start with you. Tell us about these ant smuggling cases making their way through Kenyan courts. What has actually been happening?
It sounds almost unbelievable when you first hear it, because when Kenyans think about wildlife trafficking, we think about elephants, rhinos, ivory, maybe even pangolins. We don't immediately think that somebody can be arrested at the airport with thousands of ants. But this is exactly what has happened again this year. I think it was around March, where there was a Chinese national who was arrested at Nairobi's Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, and he had more than 2,000 live ants in his luggage. So they had been packed in very small tubes. So what makes this interesting is that it follows a pattern where Kenya is being used as a transit route for these ants, but it's a very interesting and unique thing to see that we are hearing such stories in the courts, being in the courts.
Indeed, it is interesting and unique, and you've talked about the Chinese national case, but walk us through the so-called ant gang. I mean, who are they, and what has the court process revealed about how organized this trade is?
This is where I think the economics become really fascinating. You mentioned the ant gang case. I remember it was around 5,400 ants, which were valued at more than 1.2 million Kenya shillings. That's around 9,300 USD at the time. So researchers, I think it's researchers from ISS, Institute for Security Studies, calculated that if individual ants were being sold abroad at this kind of prices, they are going to worsen the situation, because we are going to see more of this kind of crimes. And that's important because somebody in rural Kenya might collect an ant for what seems like decent money locally, while the final seller, who is in Europe or Asia, now we are talking about the ant gang, can potentially make many, many times that amount. So in this case that happened this year, 2026, prosecutors said that the suspect was selling the ants for just 100 Kenya shillings each, less than $1.
Thanks for that, Andrew. And we'll talk more about the economics of things. But Dino, in simple terms, why do these tiny harvester ants matter so much to the savannah? I mean, what would we actually lose if they disappeared, do you think?
Thank you. Yes, these ants are probably one of the most important species, if not the most important species in our savannas and grasslands. Harvester ants, they live in these nests. They form these big, beautiful round nests that are like little clearings in the grassland. And the nests persist for a long time. One in each nest, there's just a single queen. And that queen lives for, 40, 50 years, even longer. And throughout the life of that nest, of that colony, the ants are collecting seeds. And so they provide incredibly important ecosystem services in that they help disperse seeds, because while they collect them to eat, they also drop a lot of the seeds along the way. They then also mix the seeds up. So they take different species of seeds and they spread them around. So they're creating a very diverse, very dynamic system. The ants, indirectly then, through their seed dispersal and nutrient cycling that they're so important for, are supporting, hundreds of other species of birds, of insects, of even the big animals, the rhinoceros that's grazing on grass, the elephant that's eating grass, the cow that's eating grass and producing milk. All these animals are directly connected and indebted to the ants, who are so incredible in what they do. The other thing, of course, the ants themselves are very important food for many different animals. You have elephant shrews and various birds that feed on them, but you also have these animals called the aardwolf, which is a little miniature hyena, whose diet is made up primarily of harvester ants. Almost half of its diet is made of these ants. And you also have species like the pangolins. There are 3 pangolin species in Kenya, and 2 of them, the ground pangolin and the giant pangolin, both include harvester ants as a major part of their diet.
Right. And Dino, you mentioned something important. You said there's only ever really one queen per colony. What happens when, especially to the environment, when the queen is removed in practical terms? What's the ecological and maybe environmental damage that can be left behind as a result of her being removed?
Yes, thank you. What was really shocking when I saw the numbers of queens being traded, because they're buying these individual young queens, it was absolutely shocking. Even I, as an entomologist, I go out there and I watch ants, but if I'm very, very lucky, a few times a year, I might spot a queen, because the queens only emerge, the young queens, so these colonies produce these young virgin queens. They fly out. They fly a short distance, they release a pheromone, they are pursued by males, the males mate with them, that's it, that's the end of the male's life and duties. And then you have the young queen going off to start a new colony. So when you talk of 2,000 or 5,000 queens, I mean, that is a lot of young queens to collect and to take out of the landscape. Now, at this moment when these colonies are kind of in their reproductive phase, they do produce, many, many thousands of queens. And most of those will not make it. They might be eaten by other animals, by other ants. They may disperse and get lost. But the fact is, you will not have any new colonies and any renewal of the colony and the nest and the role it plays ecologically if you don't have those young queens, because that young queen goes on to become the mother of the entire colony. And when we look at an ant colony, in harvester ants in particular, you only have one individual queen. And that queen is the one who produces all of the daughters that make up the workers and individuals that form the bulk of the colony and do all the tasks every day and go out and collect seeds and construct the nest and clean and look after everything and tend the larvae and tend the queen. So removing a queen from a landscape would kill that nest. It would kill that colony. And if you're removing, thousands of queens, you're potentially really disrupting the ability of the savannah to renew itself, and of these ants to continue providing all the hard work and the services that they're doing for us.
And you've talked about, the importance to the savannah, but I'm just now wondering, and it's probably the million-dollar question here, why is the world smuggling African ants to begin with? I mean, is it really just about keeping them as pets, or is there more to it, Dino?
Again, I was so surprised by the numbers. I mean, this is crazy given what people are paying for them. And of course, I want people to look at ants and pay attention to all insects and all living things because they are wonderful. But we shouldn't be catching them and smuggling them. Why are they doing it? Obviously, they are keeping them as pets. And there seems to be a big underground sort of movement of keeping ants. And people have kept ants for a long time and studied them. And that's a wonderful thing to do, to be curious and to learn about nature. But in this case, what I think has happened is these ants, because they are larger, they are brightly colored, they are more, they're very gentle. They form these large colonies. They have a lot of behavior. They have all these individuals of slightly different sizes within the nest. This seems to be making them very popular and very, very sort of targeted in the ant keeping world. They are really like the tigers or the lions of the ant world in some way. Now, the other thing I think that's interesting about people keeping them, I've tried to engage with some of the ant keeping community, and I think a big part of it is being driven by a lack of contact with nature. People are desperately trying to find something to connect with and to have that emotional and that spiritual and that, biological connection with. And clearly this is filling one of those needs, so it's very strange, but I think the thing to do is obviously we've got to stop the trade, but we also need to engage with people and say, hey, if you're that interested in these ants, come and visit Kenya and go and look at them in the field. Don't buy them.
Andrew, I'm going to bring you back in here. I mean, Kenyans are used to hearing about elephants and rhinos being poached, and you even mentioned that in the beginning of this conversation. But ants, I mean, how do people react when they hear about this? Are Kenyans even talking about it?
Yes, please. It is one of the most interesting stories coming from my region. So if you stopped ordinary Kenyans in Nairobi and asked them to name our most valuable wildlife, I can almost guarantee ants will not be anywhere near the top of that list. But yes, people are talking about this because it's a unique story and it's something that we are not used about it. So yes, there's a lot of interest from Kenyans, and there's also a lot of people are actually following this topic.
Okay, Dino, let's get back in there. And earlier on when we were having this discussion, Andrew mentioned about the economics of things, and I was just thinking out loud. I mean, there's clearly a lucrative market for these ants as pets abroad. Is there any workable way to regulate the trade, perhaps through legal breeding, for example, rather than just banning it altogether?
Thank you. There are opportunities where, some projects can raise insects. In fact, there is one called the Kipepeo project at the Kenya coast around Arabuko-Sokoke forest, where farmers raise butterflies, and the butterfly pupae are exported to butterfly houses live, and they fly around and give people a lot of joy and pleasure. And that raises significant income for the farmers. There are about 800 farmers involved in this project. However, with ants, it's slightly different. Ants don't reproduce in the same kind of easy way that butterflies do. In a butterfly, a single butterfly female will lay 100 eggs or more. Each of those becomes a caterpillar. You feed it, it grows, it becomes a pupa, and then an adult butterfly. With ants, especially with harvester ants, it's a bit more complicated. You have that single queen who founds the colony all by herself, lays the eggs. And as she does so, she has this very unusual system of reproduction. So ants and bees and wasps are haplodiploid. The females are produced from fertilized eggs. So as the queen lays an egg, she chooses to fertilize it with the sperm that she stored from the mating, that she had many, many decades ago in her life. And that produces a female. If she does not fertilize the egg, it produces a male. So first of all, the timeline, it takes a young queen perhaps at least a couple of decades at a minimum to get to the point of where the colony is mature enough and strong enough to start producing virgin queens. So it would take a long time to set them up and breed them. And, the ants are very seasonal. They only do their reproduction around the rainy season. That's why, most of the seizures have been made at the beginning of the rains, around Easter. And so this species is vulnerable. It's vulnerable to many other things that are affecting savannas and grasslands, from droughts to fires to climate change to, clearing and burning and pesticides and everything. But it would also be vulnerable if we tried to trade it. And I also think, we may not think much of ants in terms of their behavior and what they do, because they are so small and there are so many of them. But I'd like to quote a very wise man. His name was King Solomon. And he said, go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, in the book of Proverbs in the Bible. And he was observing, in Jerusalem all those thousands of years ago, he was observing the same ant that we have here in East Africa. And that ant occurs from the Mediterranean down to Southern Africa. So King Solomon's observations were very, very on the point. And for me, ants are working hard. They're supporting all of the life we have in Kenya, whether it's in agriculture, in the nutrient cycle, whether we think of the carbon cycle or the nitrogen cycle. Ants and other groups of insects like termites are essential. If we lose them, we lose our ability to have healthy grasslands, to sequester carbon, to keep nutrients flowing, and to support cattle and all the goodness that cattle bring us. We have so many communities that are pastoralists, depending on livestock, cattle, sheep, goats, camels. All of those need ants because the ants are keeping that whole system going. And so I would say no. The ants are already producing so much economic value, so much ecological value, that no, this does not need to be turned into another item of trade, because we should value nature obviously for its intrinsic values, but also for the fact that it's supporting our daily lives. Every single one of us in Kenya, we take tea in the morning, we have milk in our tea, and that milk is there thanks to the cow, but the cow is there producing milk thanks to the grass, and the grass is there thanks to the ants.
Wow, what a compelling argument, Dino. And I'm just now thinking about those who are buying these ants abroad. I mean, what sort of responsibility do you think they should be having or be thinking about? And especially when you talk about the conditions. I mean, you talked about time, for instance, and the unusual system of reproduction. I'm also just wondering what happens when these ants are released into non-native ecosystems abroad.
Yes, exactly. That's a huge issue. And several ant species are counted amongst the world's worst invasive species, including here in Kenya. We have an ant called the big-headed ant that was introduced in Kenya probably way back, in the sort of early days of developing horticulture and agriculture in large-scale farms. And this ant has taken over entire landscapes. From Nairobi to Naivasha, there's like one colony that's, spreading and devastating native ant species. And so moving insects, moving ants, moving any species around the world without, the proper kind of considerations is extremely risky, because it could escape and it could go on to damage other ecosystems. So we should think about that. And the other part of this is, if you look at these ants, they are so sophisticated, they communicate, they live a long time, they have behaviors, they have a family life living together, the mother and the daughters, all the workers in the colony. And what right do we have to disrupt that? So I also think there's an ethical side to this. We should treat other living things with respect. And that's, important, because in this case, it's both the responsible thing to do, but also the kind of practical thing to do, given how much they're doing for us.
Andrew, is there also any serious effort on the ground to prevent this trade from happening in the first place in Kenya?
Definitely. Kenyan authorities are doing a lot to deter this kind of trade, because, Kenya has a fairly strong wildlife conservation framework. The KWS is usually looking to protect wildlife. Over the years, I've done stories where they have been investigating wildlife crime and also enforcing the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act. So what's interesting about these ant cases is that authorities right now are effectively saying the law does not only apply to charismatic animals. So let's say things like elephants and all that. So they're doing a lot to ensure that they look at these border points. They look at these places where ants are smuggled from, and ensuring that such ants do not find their way to Europe and to Asia. So I'll say that the authorities are doing a lot to ensure that they are arresting and prosecuting these smugglers. But definitely a lot also has to be done, because I think it also requires international cooperation as well. It cannot just be from this side, just from the Kenyan side.
A lot more still needs to be done. And Dino, I'd like to give you the closing remarks here. I mean, insects are not presently included in most legal definitions of wildlife trade around the world. I mean, what would it take to change that so animals or insects like these ants are better protected?
Thank you, Lucy. And again, to emphasize, what Andrew just said, that this is being taken very seriously by the Kenyan authorities, the Kenya Wildlife Service. And I do believe this may be the first time in the whole world that a national government has prosecuted, investigated and pursued a case to defend ants. So I'm so proud of KWS. I'm so proud as a Kenyan that they've stood up for ants and for all biodiversity. And I would say, that really what we should do is think about the intrinsic value of ants and everything that they do for us, and how much they contribute, and really, we obviously detecting things at the airport is important. But, once you've detected it there, the queen ants have been removed from the wild, or if it's ivory, the elephant has already been killed. So that needs to go hand in hand with preventing it. And we do that through education. And for me, it's getting people all across Kenya to celebrate and connect with insects and with all living things and with ants, and just realize, this is our heritage. It belongs to all of us in the country.
Wonderful. Dr. Dino Martins, an international ant expert and one of the leading voices on East African insect ecology, and DW's Andrew Asike in Nairobi. Gentlemen, thank you both for your contribution today.
Thank you so much, Lucy.
Thank you for having me, Lucy.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
Most of us walk past ant nests every day without a second thought. But for the communities living beside these savannas, and for the ecosystems that depend on what happens underground, these tiny creatures matter enormously. So, is enough being done to protect these tiny insects? What do you think? Share your thoughts on Facebook and TikTok at DW Africa. Listen on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our DW Africa YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. This show was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabi. I'm Lucy Riley. Bye for now.
DW. Made for minds.